Hi again, everybody. Welcome to my latest video. Well, this is actually going to be the first video for part 4 of my new server build. This is where I start the software install. And the product that I'm using actually works out fairly well, a free product called XigmaNAS. If there's anything that you find useful in this video or just generally like, again, please do me a favor and subscribe to my channel. So the first thing I want to cover is a description of what I'm going to be discussing today. I'm going to be installing XigmaNAS. Included with that will be first downloading the latest version from the XigmaNAS website and creating a bootable USB from that. Then I will actually boot from that USB and install XigmaNAS to the system disk, the one that I had allocated on my server, the 500 gigabyte, just for that purpose. Then I'm going to remove the USB and reboot, so it'll boot from the actual hard disk, or in this case an SSD hard disk. Then I'm going to go through and configure the network and how the GUI can access it so that I could finalize the configuration. Then I'm going to log into the web GUI from a PC that's connected on my network, and I'm going to finish the configuration. That's where the detailed configuration will take place. Using the GUI interface, many steps to that. The first thing we need to do is do the system and network setup. We did some of that during the base install in the second step here, but now we're going to do the final detailed steps. Then I'm going to import all the disks, and this includes the 4 drives that are the 6 terabyte drives that will make up my NAS storage array, and also the single drive, the 500 gigabyte NVMe, that will be my cache drive. I'm going to format all the disks, but in the initial pass I'm just going to format the ones for the data area. I need to create what's called a virtual device. Now, if you're wondering about some of this terminology, there are several good papers out there. I'll put a reference to one of them at the bottom of this video so you can look it up and read through it. If you're interested about how the ZFS file system actually works, very powerful, originally created by Sun Microsystems. Then I'm going to create a disk pool. We need to then add user groups and users. And then we need to enable, this is the big step, enable file sharing on this NAS device. Now, do you have a cache drive? Well, if you don't, we get out, we're done. We leave it as is. But in my case, I do, so I'm going to install the cache drive. Now, I already got it installed, physically that is, so I don't have to do that step. I've already got it imported as well because I did it in the earlier step here, since it was already part of this set of disks that were available. And then I need to do what's called a sync drives, and it has to synchronize all the drives amongst each other. It does that normally as time goes on every few minutes, but I want to make sure it is synced before we do any real changes to the structure of the drives. Then we're going to format that one drive, the NVMe drive that will be the cache drive itself. I will add that drive to the pool as a cache drive. A final sync, and the NAS system is fully functional. There's a quickie now on ZFS and why we need a cache and where it fits in. It's actually called a zettabyte file system, ZFS. But the first thing you have with the ZFS file system is a cache that's in RAM. That's why the more RAM you have, the better you are. This particular server that I have has 16 gigabyte, but if it had 32, it would actually use it, or anything in between, 24, whatever amount of memory I have. It uses that as a level 1 cache, also called the ARC, or Adaptive Replacement Cache. It constantly adjusts itself appropriately and is a smarter type of cache than even the cache you would have in a microprocessor chip. At least the traditional ones. Some newer ones coming out are sophisticated as well. Then we have the level 2 high-speed disk cache, or L2 ARC, and that such would be something that's faster than your normal drive, such as an NVMe drive. And then the final part is the actual disk storage pool. That's the area where you're actually going to store things on your NAS, data, files, whatever it is. That's the largest part of all of the storage. As you can see, It's not totally representative, but it gives you a general idea of the RAM is the smallest, then the high-speed disk cache is a little bit larger, and then the final pool. And in my case, it follows this pattern. I have 16 gigabytes of RAM. About 15 of it is going to be available for the ARC. Then I have 500 gigabytes for the L2 ARC. And then I have over 14 terabytes. After it allows for the parity error correction to mimic the RAID 5 configuration. Much smarter than base RAID 5 though, when you read the thing on the ZFS, really. Now in some systems, they also break down the level 2 into two parts. They found that the regular level 2 by itself is very good for read, to help the read throughput. But they found that if they added ZFS intent log, then that would help the writes go well too. It's called the ZIL, and it improves the writes. Now to do that, I would actually have to have another drive. It doesn't really allocate much of that space. The existing one, it tries to optimize read if I only have one L2 ARC. I would have to have a second L2 ARC to do that. Well, the first thing we need to do is get the latest version of XigmaNAS from their website. So on the screen right now, I have their web page opened up to the file download section. And these are all the releases that they currently support. I highly suggest that you get the latest version. I ran into a problem early on with this, and I was testing it a couple of months back, and I had the wrong version of it, and it just caused me a lot of hassle. Oh, and if you're interested, the actual web URL is up here. But you can also go to just www.xigmanas.net, and it should bring you to a page that can get you here. So let's click on the top one, 12.1.0.4. Just released from the point I'm filming this about 4 days ago. Been a lot of downloads, about 4,600. It's build 7091, which is how they do it. After the .4 is the build number. Now you got a lot of choices here. You can go through the README files and you can look at the changes. I found the changes wasn't always accurate though, but you could take a look at it. They may do it differently for a different release. If you wanted to make sure you're getting it from the right place, that's where you can do a SHA checksum, but that's getting into more advanced cryptography verification of the software. And if you're going to use it for a production environment, you probably should consider doing that. But I'll leave it up to you to figure that out. Maybe in a future video, I might cover something like that. Now you see the ISO one, that's if you're going to load this from DVD or CD. So it's a .ISO that you need in order to transfer it into the DVD or CD. I don't believe it'll fit. It might fit. 585 megabytes might fit, because that's not zipped up, so a CD might work just fine. Then you got two different choices of these .gzip ones. I highly suggest you use the one that says GPT. GPT is the newer version of setting up boot sectors and storage on a hard drive. It allows for a very large number of partitions. It allows for much larger sized hard drives. So with today's equipment, I suggest you pick this one. So if you click on this, it's going through this little circle here, and then it's going to get ready to download it to wherever you'd like. So if I do a save as, let me go to my scratch area, and I'll just download it here. It's now going through and downloading it. This take a couple of minutes. Actually, it's already done. Now it came in what's called a gzip format. So what we have to do is we have to unzip that. The types of tools you use for that, there are several, but I suggest the most popular one is up here in the left-hand corner of my screen, 7-zip. And 7-zip will allow you to actually unzip a gzip file like that. So what we'll do is I'll run 7-zip, drive E, my scratch, and I'll select that file, which is the gzip for the latest version XigmaNAS. Click on that, click on the extract. It'll extract it right into the same directory. It actually creates another directory for it. All the options are pretty much the same. It'll convert it into the non-zipped format of it. Say OK to that. So it actually created a folder here called XigmaNAS, and it has the same name as the file. And then to get this onto a USB drive, which is what these .image files are meant for, USB. So what we need to do now is actually send it to a disk. Now there's several different programs to use for this as well. I like to use a program called Win32 Disk 1 right here. Let me first put a blank USB in my drive. It's drive J. I do not want to format it because it's going to overwrite everything including the format, so I'm going to cancel that. Now I'm going to run Win32 disk. I've got to go in as administrator, and it's ready to go. It sees that I have drive J, a USB drive in it. If you had more than one, you may have to select the one you want. I've only got one USB in there right now. Well, I got to select the image file first. That would help. Let me go to my scratch. That's the uncompressed format of it. And now we're good. Now it lets us do the write. It's going to wipe that whole drive out, drive J, right? That's okay, so now I have the actual USB created. And we need to then install it onto my new server and see if I can boot up with it. Okay, I'm powering it on with the USB stick installed on the back of my server. Since I have no hard drives in here right now that have any software whatsoever, especially bootable software, then it should go right to the stick. I could have hit F11, but here we go. It is now booting up XigmaNAS from the USB stick. For some reason the font comes in very small here when it first kicks off. I guess the video card has not been adjusted yet, and it gets a little bit better here, but it doesn't get big for quite a while. A little bit slower than the server should normally boot up, only because it's running off of a USB stick right now. Okay, now we have the little menu at the bottom, the console menu, and the first thing that I want to do is pick choice number 9 for install from the live CD or USB. So I'll choose number 9 on here. And now it's asking me what type of install do I want. I actually want to install a ZFS file system. So I'm going to go down to choice number 6 and I'm going to hit enter. This screen shows my installer options. Now since I only have one root drive, I want to install it as a ZFS striped system. If I had 2 drives in there, I could mirror it, but I only have one right now that I've dedicated to this. So I'm just going to hit enter. Now I get to select which drive do I want to install the actual operating system on. I don't want to install in the first 4 because those are my data drives. They'll be running the ZFS form of RAID. I do not want to install it on the MVNE, which is defined here as device NVD0. I want to install it on this one, the SATA SSD, 447.1 gigabytes. Now to get it checked, you just don't hit enter here. You've got to actually hit space to highlight it, and then you hit enter. Now it's asking for my desired swap size. Now swap is where the memory will go onto the hard disk if it needs more memory. Ideally, I'm going to follow the same golden rule I follow with any operating system here, and I'm going to put a size equal to the size of my memory. So I'm going to put 16, and I put the G for gig. It accepts that. There's no way to arrow down to OK, so I just have to hit enter. Now it's asking me, do I want to customize my zroot pool partition? Yes, I do. Right now it's set for no, take the defaults, but I don't want the defaults. I want to save room on that hard drive. I will probably install Windows on that as well. I've already got a license allocated to it, so that way I can install it. And if I ever have a problem, I can use Windows 10 to troubleshoot it. So I hit space. In this case, the OK is already highlighted, so I just have to hit enter. Now it's asking me for the size of the zroot pool that I want. Just be aware that if you make this zroot pool too big, it's really going to be wasted space. It actually sets up a partition that you could set up as a mountable drive to a PC on the network. But mainly it allows you to save additional versions of XigmaNAS as new versions come in, and you want to be able to test them before you actually put them live. So I'm going to put down 120 gigabytes. That'll still leave me about half the disk, counting the fact that it allocated stuff for the other partitions that XigmaNAS needs, including the swap space that I've allocated. So I'm just going to hit OK on that. Do I want a data set? Now, data set is going to be needed if I want to be able to mount it from a PC, so I'm going to select that. Data set name. I'm going to call this one, my server is going to start with RD, so it'll be RD root. That means root to the XigmaNAS. Again, I can't arrow down, so I just hit enter. Now it's asking me what type of boot capability do I want on it. There's two different forms of GPT, which GPT is the one you want to use, as I mentioned earlier. You could set it up to use the features of UEFI BIOS. It doesn't add anything to this, so just in case you ever decided to load it on an old system, it's best to leave it on the default in this case. So I'm just going to hit enter. Now, do I want disk encryption? That's a pretty advanced feature and not likely to be something that the average person will actually need to deal with. I would suggest you just leave both of these unchecked, which they currently are, and just hit enter. In a future video, I may talk about encryption technologies. Do I want to continue with the installation, which means it'll destroy all data on that disk, ADA4, which is that 447 gigabyte SSD drive that I have. I'm going to just hit enter for yes. It's now loading the operating system onto the hard drive. And it's done. At this point, it says the XigmaNAS root has been installed on that drive, and I can go ahead and remove the stick and boot it from the hard drive this time. So what I will do is I will remove the USB stick, so it's now out, and notice that it did detect that, but I don't care about that because that's in memory only, a copy of the operating system. I will now hit reset on the server. Hopefully it boots, and it does. So now we're booting XigmaNAS. You'll see it go a lot faster now from the actual hard drive, and it's done. It's up and running at this point, running off that hard drive. Well, most of it's actually in memory at this point. It only goes out to the hard drive if it needs swap space or something, some other component of it that might still be stored within the executable image of the operating system. Now I have to log in. Now it tells you right in the instructions, if you read them, the README, that you need to log in as root, and the password is. We now come into a menu, and for this menu, now I get to actually configure things. Now I want to be able to talk to this and configure it in detail from one of my PCs using a web GUI that they provide in XigmaNAS. Now in order to do that, I have to make sure that I configure the network interfaces. So I will pick choice number 1 first, and then I will change the IP address second. Now it sees only one network interface up. There's actually 2 network interfaces on this. They happen to be both on the motherboard. At some point I will try to probably figure out how to get them both to work. Usually one would back up the other if one were to disconnect. Or if I had 2 different connections that I'd like it to follow, one to my switch and one to my router, I could do that. But for now, I'm just going to install it and set up the one. So I'm just going to hit enter because that's already highlighted as the one that's ready to be configured. Now it's asking me, do I want a second interface? I do not. So I'm going to arrow down to none. Now it's just telling me that everything went well. If I saw an error here, I would know it didn't. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit yes. We're ready to proceed. It's initiating the interface. It's initializing the interface, and now we're back to the menu. Now we have to configure my network IP address. That IP address there, 192.168.1.250, is the default that they all come with. I need to change that to match my subnet for my network in my home office. So I will go ahead and pick number 2. I do not want to use DHCP. A server has to be running with a fixed IP address. So I'm going to say no to this. Obviously that's not the IP address that I want, so I'm going to hit the backspace and I'm going to change it to my desired address for this. Let me type in that address and then I'll hit OK. Now, do I want the normal Class C subnet? I'm not going to get into this in detail here, but something to consider for a future video. The default is 24 bits. It's another way of defining that net mask of 255.255.255.0. You could actually break it down to something less than that or more than that, depending on how your network is configured. Usually only large corporations do that, however. So I'm going to take the default. Now my default gateway, that's the address of my router. So I need to do that one here, or else it won't be able to find the internet. Hit enter. Now it wants my DNS server. So the address that I gave it was what's called IPv4, which is what most people are still using these days. I'm not going to try to go into IPv6 at this point. So I will stick to this. I have to go to the website for my ISP to find out what their available DNS server is. Now that's where it does actual lookup. So when you type something in by symbolic name, it can actually find the address for it through the internet gods, the servers that are out there that provide all the data on everything. So let me type in that address. Okay, does that look right? I do not want to configure an IPv6, so I'm gonna leave it at no and hit enter. Now it's initializing, and now it's given me a new address. It shows it here, and that's the address that I wanted to have. Hit enter to continue, goes back to this default screen. Now at this point I can leave the server alone. All the rest of the configuration that I do will be from the web GUI. This is the end of video 1 for this step of my new server install. Although all recording for this step has been completed, due to both the length of this step and the time it has taken to properly complete the editing, I find it necessary to divide this step into multiple videos. The second video, which is likely the last, will be uploaded to YouTube within the next 72 hours. I do apologize to all of you watching for this delay.